Hi everyone, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me. So I am doing a creation, part of my series that adds on from this and this, and of course it's a new colour palette. In fact, I've had a couple of suggestions from viewers, thank you so much. Today I'm going with one of my most favourite colours. So if you've been watching me for a while, you may know what that colour is. But I'm going to talk more about the palette and the technique shortly. But I'm not going to be doing swirls on the background. No, I'm switching it up, I'm changing it up, and I'm going to try something new again. So I'm really excited, as always, that you're here with me along this kind of journey of fluid art expression and evolving as an artist. So thank you for all of your support. So I'm really excited. I'm ready to go. Let me take you down to see the canvas, the colours that I'm using, and I'm going to talk about my approach for the background. And of course, I'm going to swipe on top as well, a dry swipe. And it might be a colour that you might not have thought of before. So let's go. Let's see what we can create. So I'm using 3 different greens. As you know, green is probably one of my most favourite, if not the favourite colour to use, and I don't actually use it often enough. I've got 3 different brands, so I've got Liquitex, Amsterdam and Arteza. And as you can see, I'm using a Pearl Lime Green by Arteza. I'm using a Brilliant Green by Amsterdam. And I've got a deep green, a permanent deep green by Liquitex. And they're my colours for the base. I've mixed them just with water. So as you can see, they're already mixed up. And this is the consistency. As always, for my Dutch pours, I use 1 part paint, 1 part water. Very fluid. You can see that it runs from the spatula into the cup and just disappears straight away. So that's the consistency that I have here. All mixed with just water. There's no pouring medium. But I will list all of these in the description box below. So let's get that paint onto the canvas. I'm going to start off with one colour at a time, and I'm just going to drizzle the paint onto the canvas and then use my brush to spread that paint across that full surface area. And I'm going to do that each time using each colour. So there are 3 colours, and I'm going to then go through the process about how I'm going to do a completely different background from the swirls, and I can't wait for you to see this. As I'm adding each tone of green, it's about building up those layers and creating depth to this piece. You could of course just have one block colour, so one singular colour on the canvas base itself. But I feel by adding these 3 tones of green together and blending in those colours, even though it's all green, it will create that depth and spatial awareness on that base. So as I move on to the darker colour, this is about adding more kind of depth to each corner, and as I blend in those colours, you'll see overall on the surface of the canvas, it's going to give you those different tones of green. So now the paint's on the canvas, I'm going to use the same brush which has been dried off with any excess paint, and I'm literally going to do squares. I'm going to go in one direction and then another, one direction and then another. And as I build up each row, whatever pattern I did above it, I'm going to do an alternative pattern. So it's going to show almost like a hatchwork. It's going to show almost like a quilt-like design. And that's what I'm going to do for the base of this canvas. So completely different from the swirls. This is more like a patchwork, a hatchwork of the paint. So again, I'm just turning the brush each time, and then whatever pattern I've got above it, I will turn the brush the alternative way. Okay, so as I'm coming to the end, I'm going to take you in for a close look so you can see all of that texture and all of that pattern that we've created on the base of this canvas. And then I'm going to let this completely dry before we continue with the dry swipe. It's just adding a little bit more of a dimension to this. It's completely different to the swirls, so I'm excited to see how this is going to turn out. And then it's about looking at the best area for me to put the embroidery hoop and work around that hoop. So I'm going to let this dry and then we'll continue with the swipe. So these are the colours that I'm going to swipe on top. So as you can see, I've got 3 greens and a gold, 1 green by Liquitex, 2 greens by Amsterdam, and Pebeo is the iridescent precious gold. So there are my colours. Let's swipe. Okay, so I've picked my favourite area. That's the area that I want to have as my embroidery hoop centre. And then I'm going to place the paint in the outer edge of the embroidery hoop and then swipe. But I wanted each creation I do with this in this series to be a little bit different. So I'm just going to place that embroidery hoop a little bit off the canvas. So I'm not going to get a full circle in this one, and that's totally okay because each one is meant to be different. So I'm going to take one colour at a time and I'm going to literally drizzle the paint on the outer edge of the embroidery hoop before we swipe with our sponge brush. Okay, so that's the paint down, and I'm now just going to use the sponge brush to dip into the paint and then drag that paint from the outer edge of the embroidery hoop to the outer edge of the canvas. And I'm just going to drag it as far as it will go. If there's a few gaps in that swipe, that's okay, that's how it's meant to be. But I'm just going to go over it a couple of times and then move on to more paint. And I'm going to do that all the way around the embroidery hoop. Just dipping that sponge brush into the paint, applying a little bit of pressure, and just swiping it towards the outer edge of the canvas. I'm really happy with the way this is turning out, guys, and I'm just going to take you in for a close-up so you can see the progress so far. And you can see that hatchwork in the centre of that circle. So you can see those colours that we placed around the outer edge of the embroidery hoop, which included the gold. You can see all those colours there. They have been swiped out towards the outer edge. And don't worry too much about the edging of this canvas. I am going to be doing some spray paint, so don't worry too much about that detail. But we build up the layers in this one, and we build up process after process. So I'm going to let this dry, and then I'm just going to add a little bit more to this one. I'm going to take a thinner sponge brush and I'm dipping it into the silver paint, and I'm just going to do a fine line in between those more broader lines that we did with the green and the gold, and I'm going to do that between each one of those. So I'm dipping the sponge brush into the silver and then placing the brush onto the canvas, and I'm just swiping from the middle of each of those green swipes to the outer edge of the canvas. And I'm going to go around that circle again and do that between each one. I'm really loving how that silver is working with all of those greens, and I want to take it one step further. I love the more kind of delicate lines of silver in between each swipe, but I'm going to add a block silver swipe on top of those green ones. That's going to bring in a little bit more light and more contrast to the overall creation. So again, I'm just dipping the sponge brush into the silver, and I'm swiping over the top of those larger green swipes that you can see. I'm just starting from where the hoop would have been, and then just dragging that paint along that line towards the outer edge. And I go over it a couple of times. I just take any excess paint off with me. Again, just starting here and just slowly swiping, dragging that paint towards the outer edge. And I'm going to do that in each one of those green sections. I'm going to let this one fully dry. I'll take you in so you can see the progress that we're making with this. Again, this is about building up all of those layers. And then I'm going to take this creation into my garden because there's obviously good ventilation outside. And I'm going to use my spray paint to do the edges. And I'll show you now how I do that. I'm literally covering all the sides with silver. And then I'm just going to go over some of the area and add a little bit more mist to each of those corners and along those edges. Get ready for the big reveal because I can't wait to show you this finished creation. So, are you ready? I'm going to start from the middle of the circle and I'm just going to slowly pan out so you can see all of that detail. You can see how that silver really helps that shimmer and that light. But what I really do love is that added sprayed silver paint around those edges, just to kind of give it a misty effect on the outer edges of that canvas. I loved how we built up all those layers. We did different dry swipes throughout, starting with that green and gold, and then the small silver ones, and then the larger silver ones on top. I've had so much fun with this, and each time I do a creation in this series like this, it gives me so many more ideas. So I've done swirls on the background, and now I've done this hatch-like effect on the background too. What is next? I have so many ideas, but if you'd like to share any of yours, or if there's anything you'd like me to try out within this kind of design, then drop them in the comments below. A big thank you to each and every one of you for all of your support. I really do appreciate it, and I really hope I get to see you again in the next video. Take care everyone, have a great week ahead. Bye.